they are catering to. And thirdly, we have institutions which have production and broadcast archives, which is an institution like Cinema Vision India. Are any of you aware of this? There used to be a TV program on Doordarshan called Surabhi.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Surabhi. So Surabhi was hosted by Siddharth Kak and Renuka Shahane. And Siddharth Kak's institution, Cinema Vision India, is the one which produced Surabhi for television. And they are one of our partners. And so for each episode of 30 minutes that Surabhi was telecast, about 30 hours of material was shot. So we have those uncut footages as part of our collection. So everything which was raw has come into the archives. So that is a broadcast archive or a production archive in that sense. And we also have the media center, the instructional media center at the Maulana Azad National Urdu University in Hyderabad, where we also recently conducted a 3-day workshop on digital data management and audiovisual archiving. So that's the other institutions. We have really, in this 30 institutions that are our partners, we have all varieties represented as our partners. And as far as our collaborators are concerned, those are at the intersecting points of the circles. We have Center for Development of Advanced Computing, some of you might be aware, CDAC. This is CDAC in Pune, which is our collaborating institution. It has helped us build the digital asset management system that we have. Then the National Informatics Center, which is the government's infrastructure for hosting digital data online. They are our collaborators. We have Prime Focus Technologies, which was helping us with the digitization work, the transfer from analog audio and video recordings to digital formats. And then we have the Center for Internet and Society from Bangalore, which is a non-profit organization which helped us put together intellectual property rights advisory to sort of unlock archival collections. We realized that one of the biggest roadblocks to making any collection accessible online in the public domain was the intellectual property rights associated with it. So institutions were very happy that, yes, you can come and digitize our collection, but when we said that we will digitize and then we will make it accessible online, then a lot of them were like, no, we cannot make them accessible online because we don't know whether we have rights, or someone might come and file a case against us. Why did you or how did you make these recordings available online because my rights are being violated, etc. So we realized that we need to put together a very carefully crafted intellectual property rights advisory as well. So these are our sort of partners and collaborators. It's also important for all of us to be aware that no initiative and no institution and no project runs in isolation. You will always have multiple stakeholders, some of them which are your partners, some of them are collaborators, but we were able to put this project together thanks to the sort of synchronization and the harmonization that we were able to achieve across our partners and our collaborators. So this is just a little bit of an idea of the graphical spread of our institutions. Like I said, we have 15 governmental and 15 non-governmental institutions. For a pilot phase initiative, fairly well spread, yes, with an unduly high percentage in the NCR region, but that is, it's very difficult to sort of not do that because so many institutions are housed in the NCR region. So we have 10 institutions in the National Capital Territory region, but we have institutions in several states, UP, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Kerala, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Assam. So we want to have this reach out to many more regions and several other states which have not been covered yet. But then again, this was the pilot phase initiative, and we were hoping that we would get the culture to take it to the next phase where we can expand it from 30 institutions to 300 institutions. And we conducted a nationwide survey to find those institutions which would be our partners. So a few key implementation aspects of this initiative. Like I said, that the 30 institutions which are our partners would themselves have about 1 lakh hours of audio and video recordings available. And so how did we come up with the fact that we will digitize 30,000 hours? So we drafted content selection guidelines, because not everything in our collection is sort of worthy of being prioritized, right? If we have a collection of museum objects, say 30,000 museum objects, maybe 3,000 of them would be masterpieces. Yeah, the remaining might be sort of more generic and collection fillers, but they might not get categorized as masterpieces of the collection. Masterpieces of a collection would always be a smaller percentage of the overall collection of an institution. So similarly, for audio and video recordings also, we thought that it would be a good idea for us to draft content selection guidelines in collaboration with our partners, wherein we ask them to undertake two kinds of two parameters. One is on the basis of formats. So we gave priority to older formats of audio and video recordings. So if you had a film reel, that would get more priority, or if you have a digital audio tape, it might get a lesser priority. So depending on the age of the format, you prioritize it higher. And second parameter was on the basis of content. What kind of material is recorded on that tape, whether it's a film reel or an audio spool. What kind of content is on it? Is it something very, very unique, or is it something which you might be able to find in other collections? So if it is very, very unique, then so ideally, if it is something which is very unique in terms of content and an older format, would get the highest priority. Is that clear? Yeah. So we drafted content selection guidelines in collaboration with our partners. The second key aspect of this initiative, and the one which took a lot of time to begin with, was the setting up of digitization and metadata standards. The digitization standards that we have followed in the National Cultural Audiovisual Archives are in line with those which are recommended by the International Association for Sound and Audiovisual Archives. And the metadata standards that we finalized on, I'll show them to you when I show you the website, is based on the extended Dublin Core scheme. Is anyone else here aware of Dublin Core? What is Dublin Core? Have you heard the term Dublin Core?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay, we'll come up on that. Okay. So digitization and metadata standards were very important for us to put in place, because we realized that every institution has its own way of cataloging its own collection, right? There might be certain common fields across our institutions, but we realized that every institution was doing something different while listing or cataloging or creating metadata for their collection. And for this initiative, it was very important for us to come up with a metadata schema which will take into account the diversity, but will also help us create a homogeneous framework where we can bring everyone in and unite them under an umbrella. Because if we went by every institution's own unique way of cataloging its collection, there would be no way to create a common platform where all their material could be shared. And we wanted to achieve this kind of interoperability, which is that one institution should be able to share its catalog with another institution and immediately understand what are the unique parts of that collection, and vice versa. And then the third key implementation aspect of this initiative was that because we were, sort of on a very tightly monitored timeline, we put in place standard operating procedures for both the project management unit here at IGNCA as well as all our partnering institutions, because it was crucial for us that we are all on the same page and we all understand what needs to be done. And for every digitization cycle that we had in this project, each digitization cycle was about 90 days, so 3 months. So we went through about 8 or 9 such cycles, and we were able to synchronize the outputs because we had standard operating procedures. And this is again something which a lot of cultural institutions need to develop, have for the very, very basic tasks that they undertake on a daily basis, have very clearly laid down standard operating procedures. This is what we need to do in terms of taking a stock inventory of a collection. This is what we need to do in terms of creating a conservation note for our collection and things like that. If we have standard operating procedures, it becomes easier to sort of transfer that knowledge from across the staff that we have at institutions, and even when there is changes in staff, if those documents are in place, it becomes easier for the next person who comes to take charge of a collection to sort of understand what has happened earlier. I'll skip the achievements now. So just a little bit of an indication of the strength of our material, the strength of our content. The National Cultural Audiovisual Archives web portal went live in 2016, and from that point onwards we have maintained logs of people who have logged on to our web portal to see our recordings on our web portal. And you realize that only 1/5 of the global access is India. 4/5 of the access is from abroad, So that shows the power and the strength of our material, of our content, of our archival and intangible cultural heritage. There are so many people who are interested to find out more about it, to do research on it, to study it, to educate themselves. So if we are to look at numbers, we have an overwhelming majority of our content being looked at from outside India. With the USA nearly double, more than double of the access from India itself. So how much are we aware of our own heritage? This is a very clear representation of the fact that how poorly equipped and how poorly educated we are about our own heritage. Probably several people sitting in this room would also not be aware of the fact that there is a web portal like this containing so many interesting recordings, but people in countries like America and Australia and Germany, Canada, they are accessing the web portal, they are reaping the benefits, they are researching, they are writing about it, and here we are, we are basically just sort of become resource or content creators for them, whereas we can do so much more, value addition to what we have. So this is a good wake-up call in that sense. One of the things that we sort of aspired for from the very beginning of this initiative, the National Cultural Audiovisual Archives, is we wanted to attain an international certification for being a trustworthy digital repository. I'll talk a little bit more about it. But what that meant was that from the very beginning, we wanted to put together all kinds of policy documents in place, so that whenever there is change in staff, whenever there is change in institutional leadership, whenever there is any doubt that we have about running the initiative, we can go back and refer to these documents as the reference points. So where I think almost all museums and galleries would also have policy documents such as, like collection policy. Everyone would have an informal idea of what is their collection policy, which kinds of objects we will admit into our collection, which kinds of objects we will not take into our collection. We will also, most institutions will also have an access policy. Who can gain access to the collection? Who has permission to go into the storage room of the gallery or the museum to look at how our, how our content is stored? Not everyone in the institution itself will have access, right? I mean, we work in the digital section of IGNCA, the Cultural Informatics Lab. So I don't have access into the physical cultural archives of IGNCA. I have to seek permission to gain that access. So that access, I mean, we all in our institutions, we have an understanding as to who has the access, but we often do not have a well-written down access policy. And I think it is important that we write down these kinds of policies and tailor-make them to our institutional requirements. How many institutions represented here have a collection policy? Collection policy or an access policy?
No.
You have what kind of material is there in that collection policy?
Like
use the mic, please. Yeah.
So in Pyramid Museum, we have collection management. So not everyone is allowed to go in the storage area. So we have to seek permission from the curator, and we have to take purpose. And there is a accession record register who is visiting the stores and why, what time, date, everything is recorded.
कलेक्शन इसके बारे में पॉलिसी है और आपका कलेक्शन तो वही है जो फोर्ट के अंदर है बेसिकली, है ना? देयर इज नो एक्सटर्नल बाहर से आता है कलेक्शन. Yeah.
So I'm from Municipal Legislative Assembly Museum, and our museum is more of a collection.
Correct.
So while doing the collection, we try to select only those objects which are politically important to see.
So
We don't have any written policy as such,
right.
but we make.
So this is more like an intuitive understanding of what kind of objects would be sort of taken into the collection. But I think it might be worthy for the institution to undertake an exercise to write down a collection policy. And also something like this, which you're saying, that's the procedure. What you're talking about is the procedure of gaining access to the collection. So the procedure is that you apply, the procedure is that you write down, and then the procedure is that you gain the access. But the policy is not written down. The policy would be things like what are the guiding principles of access? What are the guiding principles or the philosophy behind building the collection? That would be the collection policy, right? Or a vision, mission, and objectives. I think a lot of our institutions have an informal or an intuitive vision of what we are doing. But when it gets written down, it's very helpful because it's then a reference point, or it's at least a sort of a starting point. Because very often in our work we get carried away and we digress so far away from what is our actual mission statement that having a document like a vision, mission, and objectives will help us course correct and come back to the focus of what we ought to be doing, right? Similarly, because we are a digital initiative, we created a digital preservation policy. We also created, for the purposes of this group, we also created a disaster recovery plan. I'll show those documents to you. And we created something called traceability matrix, which is basically a spreadsheet which contains all the various tasks that are undertaken as part of the initiative and who is responsible for it. Does any institution have something like this? A person to person, an individual to individual detailing of the tasks they are supposed to carry out, the responsibilities that they have, and what happens if they don't carry out those responsibilities. Does any institution have this? Yes, no? You do?
Yeah. In my museum, we have this guide lecturer who will guide the visitors. There's gallery attendants where they will look after the gallery, which includes both cleaning the objects and everything, and then we have a conservation assistant also who look after the conservation. But there is no such policy to make them punish when they don't.
No, this is not about punishment. No, not at all. So what you're
I
telling
can only
me...
ask for help from them.
Right.
That's
No, this is very useful because what you're telling me is basically the typology of the kinds of people which are there in your institution, and that is what the traceability matrix is supposed to contain. So if you're able to just tabulate it, put it together in one place, it will help you realize what are the various roles and responsibilities and whether there are overlaps. Very often in our institutions there are huge amounts of overlaps between what people are doing. And to try and optimize that, a document such as the traceability matrix is really helpful because so for a particular group of people, like you're saying the guides, they would have one set of tasks. Naturally within that set there would be overlaps. But between the guide and the collection manager there cannot be any kind of overlaps. If there are overlaps there, then there is a problem in the institution. So if you are able to create that kind of a typology in your institution, that will sort of help you map out and figure out what kinds of tasks do you undertake on a day-to-day basis and where you need to do further optimization to achieve sort of better quality outputs. Yeah? So these are the kinds of policy documents that we drafted from the very beginning, and we were very keen that we have a clear sense of where we are headed. Designated community is another important thing. Do we know, as our institutions, do we know who are our users? Who are our users? Are we aware? Who are the different kinds of users? So every place where I talk to, they will say that, oh, students are there, researchers are there. It's all very, very vague. It's very vague. Are we able to figure out what kinds of users and what kinds of material do we have for which group of users? So if you're a museum which is catering to adults as well as children, do you have customized material which is suitable for both those categories, or are we just hoping that it is? We are just hoping. We are doing our best. Since we are doing our best, then let it sort of, we just figure out that, okay, it must be interesting because people are coming. That's not the way to work. We need to figure out our users and their requirements. And if we are falling short to cater to groups of users, what can we do to better deliver content to them, right? So just to give you an idea of the various kinds of documents that are very crucial for any cultural institution to run, so that it has a very sorted understanding of its own identity, its own mission, its own mandate, and its responsibilities to its users. Because finally, we are all institutions which are using either government or private funds, and we are providing a kind of a service, right? We are providing access to our collection, or we are providing outreach, or we are providing something which is supposed to benefit a larger group of people. And if we don't have an understanding of what those people are looking for, how can we tailor-make it? So we need every institution to undertake this kind of a internal brainstorming to understand that, okay, we have been maintaining our visitor records now for 10 years or 20 years. Let us look through. Let us look through what kinds of people have come, what they have given us feedback, and try to customize and cater to them a little bit better, right? That's not so hard to do. But it's just that if we tabulate that into our policy document, that every few years we will do this. It will help us stay updated, and it will also help us continue to be relevant to the users. Now what has happened over the last 20 years or so with the digital transformation, that a lot of cultural institutions which were not adapting have all fallen by the wayside and have become irrelevant. Right? We were just with Dr. Asal Pandya and Professor Pratapanand Jha, we were just visiting Patna over the last weekend, and we were at the two museums. We were at Patna Museum, which is the older museum, which is set up in 1928, and we were at the Bihar Museum, which was set up in 2015. And when you see those two museums, and the collections at the Bihar Museum are largely sourced from the Patna Museum. So that's the parent museum, in my understanding. However, the naming suggests otherwise, that Bihar Museum would be a bigger entity and Patna Museum would be a smaller one. But because Bihar Museum has been set up only recently, so I was amazed that when you visit Bihar Museum, it is actually it's the best museum in the country that I have ever visited, and I have probably been to more than 100 museums across the country. In terms of the storytelling, in terms of the interactivity, in terms of catering to user groups, in terms of the content, in terms of the quality, in terms of the walkthrough, in terms of the digital displays, in terms of everything, infrastructure, everything, it ranks maybe 9 out of 10 possible. But at the same time, the parent institution from where the collection is sourced, the Patna Museum, would probably rank not more than 2 or 3 out of 10, because the collection is kept so poorly, it's not been updated, it's not been conserved, it's not been catalogued. But sadly, most of our institutions fall in the second category, and very, very few institutions fall in the first category. This is the honest truth, and it is very helpful for us to admit the honest truth, because that is the first stage of trying to make something better. If we just say that, no, our institution is great, we have so many people who come every day, so we cannot do anything better. That doesn't work. Every institution can do something better, and that is what Bihar Museum is also still trying to do. They also believe they can do better. And they are working on creating more galleries, more interesting interfaces for interactivity with children and things like that. So all our institutions are in need of this kind of a reality check. And the digital framework allows you with the tools and gives you those tools for achieving that reality check.
So where is the Bihar Museum?
It's in Patna.
It's in Patna, okay. And Patna Museum is also in Patna.
Yes.
Okay.
One more question from me.
Yeah.
See, from the double it's an armament museum basically, and we have the 3,000 artifacts.
How many? 3,000?
3,000 artifacts in terms of the muskets, rifles, and the machine guns, and usually 1,000. Yes, usually 1,000 archives.
1,000?
Archives.
Archival objects.
Yes.
Which are in your storage.
Yes.
Not in display.
These are in display, but we are keeping in space.
Okay.
So we have standard standing operating procedure.
Okay.
Is made by our seniors, and now we are following those guidelines. Second, we have visitor books. We are maintaining from 1835.
Wow.
And
So that's the rich resource.
yeah, and we also have the footfall reports apart from it. And we have funds like we got some price from the outcourt, and then we maintain funds and for the maintenance. But there is a fund and figure of users, as you mentioned. So how can we figure out users? We have all the armament which is in the display library, which is on the board or on the fitment. So how can we figure out? I believe there is a restriction of the kids below 10 years, but all the visitors who used to come there are from the background of some army background, no civilian access is there. So how we want to improve
Civilian access is there.
less, very less, sir. Either those who are having some kind of army background and they go some kind of activity which can be followed. So this can be basically, my question is how to figure out this user.
I mean, I won't have a suggestion to you because your museum or your collection is defined by a particular user group to begin with, right? Your institutional collection is defined by that user group, which is people around the armed forces, either directly or the family members or things like that primarily, right? So your user group is already a niche. This is automatically a small percentage of society, right? If we are looking at how many armed forces people are there in the country, that would be a small percentage of the population of India, right? So you are already catering to a niche user group. So when you are catering to a niche user group, you need to look at other kinds of factors which are not related to users or footfall or things like that. You are looking at level of engagement. What is the level of engagement that those, because they are focused user group, they are the people who are aware of the collection. They have knowledge about those things, and the museum is probably adding on and helping to build further on that knowledge, right? So in that sense, you need to figure out how you can add further value to create more deeper engagement within that user group. Because it's not as if you can suddenly enact a policy that from now on our museum will be open to all civilians as well. That cannot be done, right?
It's going to be open, sir. My commandant wants to increase the footfall. Therefore, we are approaching the national tourism.
So that would be great. If it becomes accessible to civilians, then you have a different challenge. Because then you probably need to do far more storytelling in terms of contextualization of the collection. Right now, you don't need to contextualize the collection so much because it's within the armed forces user group. In that user group, the collection already makes sense. When you make it wider, when you throw it open to everyone, then you need to contextualize it. But as of right now, if you still go only by the focused user group that you have, you can do a study with a smaller group of people with levels of engagement. That what would you like to see in terms of further value addition that we can give to our exhibits? I mean, whether every object can have more detailed descriptions, whether galleries can have more contextualization, storytelling, and a kind of a flow. So those are some of the things you can think about doing. But if you already have footfall records and visitor records, I don't think you need to worry too much about that. If there are feedback records along with the footfall and the visitors, it would be worthy to go through those feedbacks and suggestions, especially if it is going back more than 100, 150 years. That would be really valuable because people earlier were much more honest in giving constructive feedback than they are now.
Yes,
Nowadays, when you go to a museum or a gallery, you'll just see feedback and it is written beautiful, great, amazing. That's useless. To me, it is thoroughly useless. It is completely useless to look at these comments. These are just social media comments and it might make us feel good for half a second. And as institutions, it should not even make us feel good for half a second because it's a total waste of what we intended to get out of it. We intended to get out of it honest feedback, suggestions, constructive criticism. So the older records that you would have from your visitor books would have a lot of that kind of material, and it would be useful to look through that to, sort of try and improve. Okay, so I'll come now to more focused thing as far as the disaster risk reduction measures that we have undertaken as part of the National Cultural Audiovisual Archives. I'll begin with a document that we have created called the Digital Preservation Policy. And this is useful, I think, for all institutions to look at what a policy document might look like, okay? So I would request you to pay attention to also try and do this internally in your own respective institutions, whether it's a gallery, whether it's a museum, an archive or a library or whatever kind of institution that you're working with. So a policy document is always versioned and it's always dated, okay? This policy this is version 1.02, so the version 1 was superseded by version 1.01 and then it was finally arrived at version 1.03. 10th of October 2018 is when we updated this document, okay? And the idea is for this document to be, to tell you what, to be as self-contained as possible, okay? You don't need to look at 30 other reference points to understand what you're trying to achieve through this. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Is this clearer?
Yes.
Yeah. So the document details of the digital preservation policy. And the policy assumes high significance given that National Cultural Audiovisual Archives is a digital initiative and long-term availability of digital data is crucial. So it's very clear, very crisp in its understanding what the scope of this document is. And it contains sections of mandate and responsibilities, challenges and preservation procedures adopted by NCAA to achieve its vision, mission and objectives. Okay. So what are the mandate and responsibilities? So one is the mission of the initiative. So we detail out that the rich and diverse cultural heritage of India has been recorded on various audio-video formats and it needs to be conserved. And since National Cultural Audiovisual Archive is the first of its kind, we are trying our best to bring a sense of uniformity in the parameters. And one of the major driving forces is the dissemination of the digitized assets, and we have ensured open access in the public domain. So this is a basic thing of the mission and the objectives. Objectives is what I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, the digitization of over 30,000 hours of audio and video material, formulation of standards. Now we come to the challenges. What are the challenges? For long-term preservation of digital data, there are several different kinds of challenges. So there is a lot of legacy formats for which we don't have playback equipment anymore. Audio and video recordings are probably among the most endangered things in the world, and we don't realize it because they are tied to the playback equipment. Your audio cassette cannot be played in a CD machine, your CD cannot be run on a school machine. You need unique devices to read this material. And you might have huge collections, but you might not have the playback equipment to play those recordings. And this is what we realized when we went to all these 30 different institutions, that institutions have collections, they have audio spools, they have digital audio cassettes, they have everything. But when we say that do you have a playback for this, can we see what is on this? No, we don't have a recorder, we don't have a player. So essentially these are just assets which are lying on shelves and they are useless because you do not have the means to even play them, let alone digitize and make them accessible. And the other challenge with audio and video material is the wear and tear. Every time you play a recording, its life deteriorates. So you need to make sure that you take good care when you are preparing them for being played, when you are preparing them to be digitized, just like our physical collections, right? When we send our books for digitization, we do conservation first, then we digitize them, then we conserve them again before binding them and putting them on the shelves, right? That's the procedure that we follow here at IGNCA. Any book being digitized will first be conserved. It will then come to the digitization unit where the binding will be opened. In many cases, the binding gets opened because you need to get high resolution scans. Sometimes the binding gets opened because of that. And then when it goes back, it will be conserved again, and if the need be, it will be bound again and then placed back in the shelves. So similarly, whenever we are playing audio and video recordings, we are adding wear and tear to it. So we need to make sure to follow the processes to ensure the best possible outputs, right? And prioritization is really very key, I cannot stress this enough. Unfortunately, every institution which is working with cultural data, they think that digitization is a solution. That we have digitized it, okay, now it's done. It's there, digital is there. Now, digital data's long-term preservation is far more challenging than the long-term availability of physical material. To maintain, we have in this project, we have 1.5 petabytes of digital data. Okay? 1 petabyte is 1000 terabytes. So we have 1.5 petabytes of digital data, and it gives me nightmares to maintain it every day, to make sure that it is running, to make sure that there is no corruption in the data, to make sure there is no data loss. So we need to make sure that we prioritize when we are digitizing. Let's not digitize everything without thought. Do we need it? Do we need a digital surrogate of something? Why do we need it? When we digitize it, do we have the infrastructure to store it? Do we have the wherewithal and the institutional framework and the trained personnel to update it, to maintain it? Without thinking of all these things, if we go in for just rampant digitization, we create more problems for ourselves rather than solutions. And digital data management is far more challenging. That's a subject for another day. So the preservation procedures, that's the next section. So we save our archival data in 2 different seismic zones. This is again very crucial for every one of you to understand. Disaster risk reduction measures. Even for digital data, you have to follow a lot of disaster risk reduction measures which are meant for physical collections. So we've got one set of archival data here on this campus here in Delhi, and another set which is in our Bangalore office. So that sort of ensures that there are 2 separate seismic zones. If there is loss of data in one location, we can try to get it from the other location. Similarly, for the access quality data which we have made available through our web portal, we have multiple copies. We have it on the web portal, we have it on external hard drives, we also have it on the server which is there in this institution. So after this presentation, you will all be given a walkthrough for our facilities, so you will get a sense of that. And we also have enrolled into the disaster recovery site of the NIC. How many of you are government institutions here? Okay, several. Are you all hosted on NIC? Where is your website hosted? Not on NIC?
We don't have a website.
You don't have a website. What about the other institutions? It's not hosted on NIC? Where is it hosted? You don't have a website.
वेबसाइट है पर NIC में नहीं है. NIC में कुछ डॉक्यूमेंटेशन किया था हमारे यहाँ पे.
अच्छा, तो कौन सा इंस्टीट्यूशन सर?
स्टेट आर्कियोलॉजी राजस्थान।
अच्छा, ओके।
तो अर्बन म्यूजियम में डॉक्यूमेंटेशन एमएनसी द्वारा किया गया
पर और कौन है गवर्नमेंट इंस्टीट्यूशन आप में से किसी ने आपका क्या कौन सी
क्राफ्ट म्यूजियम
ये यहाँ पे तो आपका NIT पे है?
बट अगर हम अपनी वेबसाइट ओपन करते हैं तो नॉर्मली गूगल पे लाइक
NIT is the
Dot NIC.
like where your data is hosted.
Dot NIC.
And we have run your project for you, by the way. In any case, National Craft Museum and Hastakala Academy is on NIC network. Okay. What about your?
So I'm in media, so I cover all the ministries, so they're already posted.
आपका वेबसाइट है नहीं बनाएंगे, तो that is an important thing to do.
Yes, sir, we are planning for it.
Yeah. So this NIC also offers disaster recovery sites. Websites, you all are aware of the fact that websites crash, right? So when websites crash, what do? You start building from scratch again. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. No. You're supposed to be aware of things like disaster recovery sites, where you can store another copy of your website to make sure that you don't lose digital data, right? And this is something which is, it's actually, I don't know whether to call it funny or whether it is so tragic, but the British Library recently had its website hacked. And the entire digital data that was embedded into the various pages of the British Library's website got wiped out. Now they have initiated a 5-year project to rebuild their website. Okay, so when you have digital repositories and when you have websites, you need to be aware of the fact that there are disaster recovery measures for digital data, for websites as well. So if you have a website, you should have a disaster recovery site parallel to it as well. If you are not online in this day and age, it is very difficult for me to talk to you. I don't know how you are surviving. Because the interlinkages between institutions is what is moving the field forward, right? Unless you are, I think this is a bus that we cannot afford to miss. We all need to have a presence. Otherwise, we become irrelevant much faster. As it is, cultural institutions are becoming irrelevant. In terms of disaster recovery measures for our metadata, we also store our metadata at multiple places, because data is, of course, data is gold, but our metadata, which gives information about that data, is for us more precious than gold, because that when you have 30,000 digital files, it's the metadata which is helping you navigate through it. If you don't have well written down catalog of your collection, description, keywords, all those kinds of things, so that helps in the discovery of the kinds of material that is there in your collection. Without that, even if you have a rich collection and you don't have a good metadata, that collection is useless because it's not discoverable. Discoverability of the collection is key, and metadata helps in that, and so that is crucial. Yeah, and finally, this document is linked to several other documents. It's linked to, of course, the digitization and metadata standards. It's linked to the collection policy, the storage policy, and the disaster recovery plan. So let me go back to the presentation and show you what is a traceability matrix. Okay. Firstly, let me show it risk register. Do you all have risk register in your institution? Museums would have risk register. Museums? Risk assessment? आपने collection का? आपने किसी ने किया है? कोई risk ही नहीं है. सब बढ़िया है. सब बढ़िया, कुछ हो ही नहीं सकता. हमारा collection तो अजीब, अमर है एकदम.
There are the guides.
I'm shocked.
No, sir. It's all about funds, sir.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Sir, first thing, we have to evaluate our article. So there is no value. We want to figure it out, but उससे पहले हम बताया गया कि हमें एक option करना पड़ेगा to get the value. So we don't have value. We cannot figure it out in the value concept. Next thing is the hazard. So there is a risk hazard. We have old vintage building, but it is maintained by our MES, Ministry Engineering Service, and there is a CBI inquiry on it, MES. So they are, that point is also evaluated. Now another thing, we are the sabotage risk or theft risk. We are putting some guards on the paper. They are doing their work. Just all we are doing. That's it.
No, you're telling me problems, you're not telling me solutions. We all, if there are personnel in an institution, a solution is possible. This is what I believe. You know, we have run this project managing 30 institutions and 5 collaborators with a team of 5 people across the country. Total of 5 people who made these policy documents, who managed the digital data, who created all these things, who've undertaken certifications. For all of this work, Professor Pratap Anand Jha, who was sitting here for a little while, he's the project director, but he's got so many projects. I'm the project manager and I had 4 people with me. That was the entire team of this initiative. So I'm coming to that. I'm trying to say that we are very good at enumerating our problems, but we are very bad when it comes to offering solutions. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
This is the typical situation. As far as understanding what is the risk of our collection, we don't need funds for that. We don't need funds for that. You already have a collection. Your collection, your understanding of risk would be how close to the wall is it placed. Does the wall have dampness? If the wall has dampness and it is too close to the wall, the level of risk is higher. Does the building have problems related to ventilation? If it is a paper document, the building has problems related to ventilation, my risk is higher. That level of assessment have we carried out for each and every object in our collection? I don't think so. I don't think we have. And I think that is a starting point. First, we understand what are the challenges within the thing, but in a very scientific manner, not in a vague manner, that we have an old building. We also have an old building. IGNCA's old building where we were for more than 30 years, before the Central Vista plan came into place, was more than 100 years old. It was a heritage building. It had problems related to, but we were aware of what the problems are. And there is a very easy way to calculate the level of risk. So when you talk to your management, when you talk to your seniors, when you talk to the ministry, when you talk to heads of institutions, you need to be able to make a case for it, which is through which you are able to convince them of making changes, right? If you are able to convince them, you can convince them only through a particular detailed assessment of your own issues, rather than a kind of a vague understanding that we have. So we have a way of figuring out the various kinds of risks. So risk categories, you can figure out the various categories of risks, the probability of the risk, the impact of the risk, and probability into impact would be your risk score. So higher the risk score, the more problems you have in your institution. So for this we don't need funds. For this we need to look at our collection carefully. After this you can build a very solid proposal to show